The cuffs clicked before Angela Whitmore finished saying her name. 7 miles from the gates of Fort Belvoir, under a bruised Virginia sky, Officer Caleb Harlan stood beside her black sedan with the look of a man who had already decided what kind of story she belonged in. The road was wet from a passing shower, and the red and blue lights from his patrol car stretched across the pavement in broken ribbons. Cars slowed as they passed, headlights drifting over Angela's face, her gray civilian coat, her polished black shoes, the silver watch at her wrist, the calm in her eyes. She did not look frightened. That seemed to irritate him more than anything. "I asked where you got this car," Caleb said, glancing at the sedan as if the leather seats and clean paint were evidence of something. Angela kept her voice level. "Officer, my registration is valid. My license is valid. You have both." Caleb gave a thin smile and looked her up and down, not with curiosity, but with suspicion sharpened by habit. "This car is too clean for your story." The words hung in the damp air. A few yards away, a gas station sign buzzed above a row of pumps, its white light flickering against the windshield. A man near the ice machine turned his head. At the far pump, an older white man in a faded army jacket stopped filling his pickup and watched without pretending not to. Angela noticed him, then noticed the small red light on Caleb's body camera. "Good," she thought. "Let the record breathe." "Officer Harlan," she said, reading his nameplate carefully. "Do you know who you are detaining?" Caleb laughed under his breath. Not loudly, not wildly, just enough to tell her he enjoyed the question. "I know exactly what I am looking at." Angela's jaw tightened by a fraction. She had heard different versions of that sentence in airports, conference hotels, boardrooms, and once outside a military ceremony where a security guard asked if she was part of the catering staff while her uniform waited in the car. Each time, she had learned the same lesson. Some people did not need facts to feel certain. They only needed prejudice wearing a badge of confidence. "I am requesting that you contact your supervisor and verify my identity through proper channels," she said. Caleb leaned closer, still keeping a formal distance, his voice low enough to feel private and cruel. "People say all kinds of things when they get caught somewhere they do not belong." Angela looked past him toward the back seat of her sedan. Hanging neatly behind the driver's seat was a dark garment bag containing a pressed army uniform, the 3-star insignia tucked inside, unseen beneath the fabric. On the passenger seat rested a sealed envelope addressed to a federal hearing panel reviewing complaints from military families along this corridor. She had planned to arrive quietly, listen quietly, speak only when called. But the road had pulled the hearing toward her before she ever reached the building. Caleb lifted his radio. "Dispatch, I have a suspicious vehicle stop near Route 1. Driver is claiming some kind of official status." Angela closed her eyes for one slow breath, then opened them to the wet road, the watching man in the army jacket, and the little red light that did not blink. "Please record that statement," she said softly. Caleb smiled again, unaware that the night had already started taking notes. The dispatcher asked Caleb to repeat the location, and his voice changed just enough for Angela to hear the pride underneath it. "Route 1 service station, northbound side, about 7 miles from Fort Belvoir," he said, keeping his eyes on her as if she might vanish into the rain. Angela stood beside the sedan with her wrists held in front of her, the metal cool against her skin, her posture straight from decades of rooms where hesitation was mistaken for weakness. She was 52 years old enough to know that dignity did not always protect you from disrespect, but strong enough to know it could keep disrespect from owning you. The night smelled of wet asphalt, gasoline, and pine from the dark tree line beyond the road. A truck rolled by, sending a low hiss across the pavement, and for a moment the sound pulled her back to Walter Reed Medical Center just 40 minutes earlier, where a young sergeant named Evan Price had tried to sit taller when she entered his room. He had lost friends overseas, lost sleep since coming home, and still apologized because his hospital blanket was wrinkled. Angela had taken his hand gently and told him service was not measured by how perfectly someone stood, but by what they carried when standing became hard. She had left the hospital in civilian clothes because she wanted no ceremony, no salutes, no cameras, only the quiet privilege of visiting one soldier as one human being visiting another. The uniform in the garment bag behind her was for later, for the hearing, for the room where generals, attorneys, and officials would discuss complaints from military families who had been stopped, questioned, delayed, and humiliated on roads surrounding the base. The sealed envelope on the passenger seat held statements, dates, patrol numbers, and names. Caleb Harlan's name appeared twice, not at the top, but close enough to matter. He had no idea. He looked through the open driver's door and nodded toward the garment bag. "What is that?" "A uniform," Angela said. "United States Army." He laughed softly. "Of course it is." The older man in the faded army jacket at the pump lowered the nozzle back into his truck and kept watching. His name was Walter Briggs, though Angela did not know that yet. He had served 2 tours in Iraq, had learned to recognize command presence before he recognized rank, and something about the woman standing in the road made the old muscles in his shoulders tighten with recognition. Not fear, not pity, recognition. Caleb stepped closer to the sedan and glanced at the cup holder, where a small round challenge coin rested beside a folded receipt. The coin was dark bronze at the edges, polished at the center, with 3 raised stars catching the gas station light. Caleb picked it up before Angela could tell him not to. "Nice souvenir," he said. Angela's eyes sharpened, but her voice did not rise. "Put that back, officer." Caleb turned the coin between his fingers, amused by its weight. "You military people all carry these things around now." "That was given to me by a soldier who did not live to receive his next one," Angela said. The sentence removed the humor from the air. Even Caleb paused, though only for a second. Then he placed the coin back in the cup holder with a careless little tap. Walter Briggs saw the gesture, saw Angela absorb it without flinching, and slowly reached into his jacket pocket for his phone. He did not raise it high. He did not make a scene. He simply began recording from beside his truck because he had learned long ago that memory alone did not survive paperwork. Caleb lifted his radio again. "Dispatch, driver claims she is connected to the Army. Says there is a uniform in the car." Angela looked directly at the red light on his body camera. "My full name is Angela Marie Whitmore. Lieutenant General, United States Army. Verify through Fort Belvoir Command Duty Office." Caleb smiled, but the smile was thinner now. "Sure," he said into the damp air. "And I suppose they are waiting for your call." Angela looked toward the road leading back to the base, where the darkness sat quiet and patient. "No," she said. "They are waiting for me." Caleb heard the sentence, but he did not hear the weight inside it. "They are waiting for me." To him, it sounded like another claim from someone he had already chosen not to believe. He tilted his head, studying Angela with that narrow roadside certainty some men wore like a second badge. "You expect me to call a military base because you say so?" he asked. Angela looked at the wet pavement, then back at him. "I expect you to follow procedure." The answer was simple, and that made it harder for him to bend. He preferred confusion. He preferred fear. He preferred people who filled silence with pleading, because pleading made his authority feel larger. Angela gave him none of that. She stood with her shoulders squared, her gray coat damp at the collar, her eyes steady beneath the service station lights. Caleb had stopped many drivers on that road. Some were speeding. Some had expired tags. Some were simply passing through the wrong stretch of county at the wrong hour in the wrong skin. His reports always sounded polished afterward. The driver appeared nervous. The driver gave inconsistent answers. The vehicle seemed unusual for the area. Phrases like that could make judgment look like instinct and prejudice look like public safety. Angela understood that language. She had heard it in official briefings, courtroom summaries, complaint packets, and private conversations with soldiers who had survived danger overseas only to come home and feel hunted on roads near their own base. "Step back from the vehicle," Caleb said. Angela shifted 1 pace away from the door, slowly, calmly, letting the body camera see every movement. Walter Briggs kept recording from beside his pickup, his phone held low against his chest. The gas pump clicked off behind him, but he did not move to finish the sale. Something about Angela's stillness had unlocked an old memory from Baghdad, a temporary command post outside the green zone. A black female officer walking through dust and radio chatter with 3 stars on her shoulder, and a room full of exhausted soldiers straightening before anyone gave an order. Walter had not remembered her name then. He remembered now in pieces. Whitmore. A briefing after a convoy incident. A voice steady enough to make frightened people feel organized again. He stared harder through the mist. Caleb leaned into the sedan and glanced again at the sealed envelope on the passenger seat. "What is this hearing panel?" he asked. "Federal and Military Review," Angela said. Community relations and enforcement conduct around the installation. His eyes flicked up. For the first time, the words reached him not as a claim, but as a possible threat. Convenient, he muttered. Not convenient, Angela replied. Documented. The radio crackled against his shoulder before he could answer. Dispatch asked for the full name again. Caleb rolled his eyes and repeated it, adding, She says Lieutenant General. There was a pause. Too long. Even the rain seemed to thin around it. Caleb frowned. Dispatch. Nothing came back at first but static, soft and dry. Angela looked toward the dark road leading to Fort Belvoir. She knew the command duty office would already be checking why she had not arrived. She knew Colonel Marcus Ellison would notice the delay. She knew the envelope on the seat was not merely paper. It was a line of voices waiting to be heard. Caleb tried to recover his tone. They are probably laughing over there, he said. Angela did not look at him. No, officer, she said softly. They are confirming. Walter Briggs heard that and finally raised his phone higher, no longer hiding the fact that he was recording. Caleb saw him and stiffened. Sir, put the phone away. Walter's voice came out quiet but firm. I am standing on public property, officer. Caleb's face hardened, but the radio crackled again before he could respond. This time, dispatch sounded different. Careful. Formal. Unit 14, maintain current location. Fort Belvoir Command Duty Office is requesting direct contact. Stand by for military liaison response. Caleb stared at the radio as if it had spoken against him personally. Angela remained still, the cuffs cold against her wrists, the rain beating along her sleeve, her dignity untouched by the metal. In the distance, beyond the curve of Route 1, two sets of headlights appeared, low and steady, moving toward the service station without haste. The two sets of headlights came closer through the mist, steady and official, their beams stretching across the wet road like white lines drawn toward the truth. Caleb watched them for only a second before turning back to Angela, trying to rebuild the moment he had owned minutes earlier. This does not change anything, he said, though his voice had lost its center. Angela stood beside the sedan with the same calm she had carried from the first click of the cuffs. Water gathered at the edge of her sleeve and dropped onto the pavement in slow, even beats. It changes who is listening, she said. Caleb looked toward Walter Briggs, whose phone was now clearly raised, then toward the gas station windows where a cashier and two customers had stopped pretending not to watch. The scene had slipped beyond his report. It had entered memory, video, witness, command channel, and record. He lifted his shoulder radio again. Dispatch. Confirm the nature of the responding units. Static answered first. Then a voice came through, careful and formal. Unit 14, military liaison, is en route. Maintain professional distance. Do not alter recording equipment. Await further instruction. Caleb's mouth tightened around the words he did not say. Angela heard the instruction clearly and looked once at the small red light on his body camera. It glowed against the damp fabric of his uniform, tiny and patient. She thought of the hearing room waiting beyond the base gates, the long table, the polished microphones, the officials who would speak about public trust in calm language while families sat in the back row carrying stories that had never felt calm to them. She had prepared notes about systems, training, accountability, and dignity. Now the road itself had become testimony. The headlights turned into the service station lot. Two dark government vehicles without markings rolled past the pumps and stopped near the patrol car. Their engines settled into a low hum. The driver door of the first vehicle opened, and Colonel Marcus Ellison stepped out wearing a plain dark raincoat over his uniform trousers, his posture unmistakable even before the light caught the rank on his collar. Behind him came a military police captain and a civilian liaison from the base legal office, both moving with controlled urgency rather than spectacle. Caleb straightened, uncertain whether to salute, explain, or deny. Colonel Ellison did not look at him first. He walked directly to Angela, stopped at a respectful distance, and his expression changed. Not shock, recognition, concern held tightly under discipline. Lieutenant General Whitmore, he said, his voice clear enough for everyone beneath the canopy to hear. Are you all right, ma'am? The title seemed to remove the air from Caleb's lungs. Walter's phone remained steady. The cashier inside covered her mouth with one hand. Angela inclined her head, composed, but her eyes softened at the sight of a familiar face from command. I am all right, Colonel. Please ensure this entire interaction is preserved. Yes, ma'am. Ellison turned then, slowly, toward Caleb. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Officer, remove the restraints from the general. Caleb blinked as if the word general had arrived too late to be real. I was conducting a stop based on reasonable suspicion, he said quickly. She refused to properly identify herself. Angela looked at him, not angry, not wounded, but exact. I gave my name, rank, identification request, and verification channel. Your camera recorded all of it. The military police captain stepped closer to Ellison and spoke quietly, but the words were still audible in the damp air. Fort Belvoir command confirmed she was due at the federal hearing 20 minutes ago. The civilian liaison glanced toward Angela's passenger seat, where the sealed envelope rested under the soft dashboard light. Is that the hearing packet, ma'am? Angela nodded. It contains statements from service members and families regarding traffic enforcement near the installation. Caleb's eyes moved to the envelope, and the last trace of amusement disappeared from his face. He understood then, perhaps not the pain, not the history, not the human cost, but the shape of consequence. His own roadside decision was standing beside the very file he had tried to dismiss. Colonel Ellison looked at the body camera, then at Walter, then at the witnesses inside. We will need all recordings secured and all names documented. Angela held still as Caleb reached for the cuff key with suddenly careful hands. The metal opened softly around her wrists. She did not rub the marks. She did not step back. She simply brought her hands forward, straightened the damp cuff of her gray coat, and looked at the road beyond the lights. The hearing had not been delayed. It had arrived early, under neon, rain, and witnesses. The moment the restraints opened, the air changed, but not because Angela Whitmore was suddenly free to move. It changed because everyone watching understood that her freedom should never have depended on a stranger deciding whether she looked worthy of respect. Caleb stepped back with the key in his hand, his face stiff, his confidence draining into the wet pavement beneath the service station lights. Colonel Ellison did not move closer to Angela until she gave the smallest nod. Only then did he step beside her and lower his voice. Ma'am, the panel is waiting. We can transport you immediately. Angela looked at the sealed envelope on the passenger seat, then at the people gathered around the pumps, the glass doors, the parked pickup, the quiet witnesses who had seen what polished language might later try to soften. No, she said. The panel can wait 5 more minutes. This belongs in the record now. Ellison understood before she explained. He turned to the military police captain. Secure the scene documentation. Coordinate with the county supervisor and preserve the body camera footage. The captain nodded and began making calls, his voice calm and procedural. Caleb looked up quickly. You cannot just turn a routine traffic stop into a federal matter. Angela turned toward him slowly. The neon lights drew silver across her gray coat. You did that when you ignored verification, mischaracterized my identity, and handled a citizen as if dignity was optional. Caleb opened his mouth, but the words failed him. The civilian liaison from the base legal office walked to Angela's sedan and waited for permission before touching the envelope. Angela nodded. The liaison lifted it carefully, reading the seal without opening it. This packet includes the family statements, she asked. Yes, Angela said. Service members, spouses, parents, civilian workers, and veterans. 29 statements. Route 1 appears in 17 of them. Walter Briggs lowered his phone slowly, his face pale under the gas station light. 17, he said. Angela looked toward him. Yes, sir. Walter swallowed. My neighbor's son stopped driving this road after midnight. Said he could not explain why without sounding weak. Angela's expression softened. Fear does not make people weak. It tells us where responsibility has failed. The words settled over the station more heavily than accusation. The cashier inside unlocked the glass door and stepped out with both hands wrapped around her phone. I recorded from the time he asked about the car, she said. Her voice shook, but she stood straight. I can send it. I can give a statement. Ellison looked at her with measured respect. Thank you, ma'am. Your statement matters. Caleb stared at the cashier as if betrayed by someone he had never noticed before. That was the pattern breaking in real time. People he once expected to remain background were stepping forward with names, images, and memory. Angela walked to her open car door and reached into the cup holder. She picked up the 3-star challenge coin and held it in her palm. Water had dotted its surface, but the raised stars still caught the light. Caleb's eyes dropped to it, then away. Angela did not use it to shame him. She closed her fingers around it, as if holding a promise made long before this night. "Officer Harlan," she said, "a symbol is only honorable when the person carrying it understands service." His face tightened. "I was doing my job." "No," Angela said quietly. "You were testing whether my belonging needed your permission." Silence followed. Not empty silence. Recorded silence. Witnessed silence. The kind that becomes part of a case file because no one can honestly say they did not hear it. A county police supervisor arrived in a marked vehicle without urgency, stepping into the damp glow with his coat half-buttoned and his expression already burdened by the sight before him. Ellison briefed him in concise terms. The supervisor listened, glanced at the body camera, the witnesses, the military liaison, the sealed hearing packet, and finally at Caleb. "Officer Harlan," he said carefully, "you are being placed on administrative leave pending review. Your recording equipment and report notes will be collected tonight." Caleb looked at Angela one last time, not with laughter now, but with the hollow disbelief of a man whose version of events had been interrupted before he could write it. Angela stood beside her sedan, challenge coin in hand, while Route 1 whispered beyond the station and the rain faded into mist. The hearing was still ahead, but its most honest testimony had already happened on the roadside. For a while, the service station became a place of quiet procedures. No one shouted. No one rushed. Pens moved across small notepads. Phones recorded times, names, and badge numbers. The county supervisor collected Caleb Harlan's equipment with the careful politeness people use when they realize every movement may later be examined. Caleb stood beside his patrol car, no longer centered in the scene, his face turned away from the witnesses he had once assumed would remain silent. Angela Whitmore watched without triumph. The mist had settled into a thin gray veil over Route 1, softening the headlights of passing cars and blurring the dark tree line beyond the pumps. Her wrists were free now, but the memory of the metal stayed with her, not as pain, but as evidence her body had carried before paper could. She looked down at the 3-star coin in her palm. The raised edges pressed into her skin, small and familiar. It had been given to her in Afghanistan by a young captain named Luis Ramirez after a long night of evacuation planning, when exhaustion had made everyone honest. He had told her he trusted her because she never confused command with cruelty. Years later, after he was gone, his mother mailed Angela a note saying he had kept her guidance folded in his field notebook. Angela had carried the coin ever since, not because of rank, but because it reminded her what leadership owed people when nobody powerful was watching. Colonel Ellison stood nearby, speaking with the base legal liaison, but he kept glancing toward Angela, not with impatience, with concern. He knew she would not leave until the moment had been fully preserved. Walter Briggs came closer, slowly, as if approaching a memorial rather than a person. "General," he said, then corrected his posture almost instinctively. "Ma'am, I served in Iraq. I think I remember one of your briefings." Angela turned to him. "Then you remember the heat." A faint smile crossed his face, tired and grateful. "Yes, ma'am. And the dust. It got into everything." "So did fear," Angela said. Walter lowered his eyes. "You made us feel like fear did not disqualify us." The words reached her more deeply than praise. Across the pumps, Caleb looked over for a second, hearing respect offered freely to the woman he had tried to diminish. Angela did not look back at him. Some lessons did not require eye contact. The cashier brought out a cup of coffee in a paper sleeve and held it toward Angela with both hands. "It is fresh," she said. "I did not know if you wanted it." Angela accepted it gently. The warmth moved through her fingers, a simple human offering in a night filled with official language. "Thank you." The young woman's eyes dropped to Angela's wrists, then quickly away. "I am sorry that happened here." Angela took a slow breath. "Then make sure what happened here is told clearly." The cashier nodded, shame and courage living in the same expression. The county supervisor finished sealing Caleb's body camera in an evidence bag and handed it to the military liaison for chain of custody documentation. Angela watched the plastic reflect the station lights. A tiny red light had made the difference between denial and record, but it was the witnesses who gave the record a soul. She turned toward the sedan and looked at the garment bag hanging in the back seat. The uniform inside waited in darkness, pressed, decorated, heavy with meaning. For a moment, she did not want to put it on. She wanted to remain exactly as she was, a black woman in a damp gray coat who had been doubted and still stood taller than the doubt. Then Colonel Ellison approached. "Ma'am, the panel has been informed of the delay." Angela nodded. "Good. Tell them I am bringing an additional exhibit." He followed her gaze to the service station, to the witnesses, to the officer now removed from duty, to the road where so many smaller stories had gone unrecorded. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. Angela placed the challenge coin back in the cup holder, closed her hand once around the warm coffee, and looked toward the first faint light gathering beyond the clouds. The hearing had waited for documents. Now it would receive the truth with rain still on its shoes. Angela did not drive away immediately. She sat behind the wheel for a moment with the engine off, listening to the soft tick of cooling metal and the faint murmur of officials finishing their notes outside. The service station lights glowed in the windshield, and beyond them Route 1 stretched toward Fort Belvoir like a dark ribbon waiting to be crossed. In the rearview mirror, Caleb Harlan stood beside his patrol car while the county supervisor spoke to him in a low voice. The distance between them was only 30 feet, but it looked wider than a battlefield. A man who had begun the night certain of his own authority now stood surrounded by procedure, witnesses, and consequence. Angela did not feel victory. She felt the weight of every soldier, spouse, veteran, and worker whose name sat inside the sealed packet on the passenger seat. She turned the key. The sedan came alive with a quiet hum. Colonel Ellison's vehicle led the way, followed by the military police captain, then Angela, then the base legal liaison carrying copies of the roadside documentation. Walter Briggs stood near his pickup as they passed. He lifted 2 fingers in a small, old soldier's salute, not formal enough to be ceremony, but honest enough to mean something. Angela lowered her window a few inches. Morning air slipped in, cool and clean after the rain. "Thank you for staying, Mr. Briggs," she said. Walter's eyes glistened under the brim of his faded cap. "Thank you for standing, ma'am." Angela held his gaze for one breath, then drove toward the base. The gates came into view 10 minutes later, rising from the gray dawn with American flags moving gently above them. The guard at the entrance recognized Colonel Ellison first, then saw Angela's sedan and straightened sharply. Angela had changed into her uniform in a private office near the hearing room, not because she needed rank to speak truth, but because the room needed to see what prejudice had failed to recognize. When she entered the federal hearing chamber, conversations died almost instantly. Officials sat along a polished table with folders open, coffee cups steaming, microphones waiting. In the back rows sat families from the surrounding communities, military spouses, civilian employees, veterans, and young service members in pressed uniforms. Some looked tired. Some looked angry. Some looked like they had learned not to expect much. Angela walked to the front with the 3 stars on her shoulders catching the soft overhead light. The same gray coat from the roadside hung over her arm, damp at the cuffs. She placed it on the chair beside her instead of hiding it away. Then she set the sealed packet on the table, followed by a smaller envelope containing the service station recordings and witness contacts. The chair of the panel, a senior official with silver hair and careful eyes, leaned toward the microphone. "Lieutenant General Whitmore, we understand there was an incident on your way here." Angela looked out at the room before answering. She saw a young black mother holding a folder in both hands. She saw a retired sergeant staring at the floor. She saw a teenage boy in the back row sitting beside his father, shoulders tense as if waiting to be doubted. Angela touched the challenge coin in her pocket, feeling the raised stars against her fingers. "There was not an incident," she said calmly. "There was evidence." The room went still. Colonel Ellison stood near the wall, hands folded, his expression unreadable but proud. Angela opened the packet and slid the first statement forward. "Before I speak about policy," she continued, "I want this panel to understand what policy feels like at midnight on a wet roadside when the person holding authority has already decided you do not belong." No one interrupted. No one shuffled papers. For once, the stories in the room did not have to beg for attention. They had arrived with a general's voice, rain on a coat sleeve, and proof that could no longer be filed away as misunderstanding. The senior official lowered his eyes to the first statement, but Angela did not let the room disappear into paperwork too quickly. She had seen that happen before. A person would speak from the wound, and a committee would translate the wound into language so clean it no longer smelled like life. She stood at the front of the chamber with the damp gray coat beside her and the 3 stars on her shoulders, and she made the room remain human. This statement is from a military spouse who was delayed outside the south gate until her child missed a medical appointment, Angela said. This one is from a civilian mechanic who began carrying extra work orders in his glove compartment because he believed proof of employment might protect him. This one is from a young soldier who wrote that he felt safer overseas than on the road between his apartment and this base. A small sound moved through the back row, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob, something held too long finally finding air. The teenage boy sitting beside his father lifted his eyes. The black mother with the folder pressed it tighter against her chest. Angela continued, her voice low, steady, and clear enough that no microphone could make it more honest. These are not isolated misunderstandings. They are repeated experiences shaped by assumption, dismissed by procedure, and carried home by families who were told to be patient. One panel member adjusted his glasses. General Whitmore, we will review every document thoroughly. However, regarding the roadside stop this morning, should we consider it part of the same pattern? Angela looked directly at him. She did not rush. Silence, when held correctly, could force a question to hear itself. Yes, she said, because the same assumption appeared before the same facts were ignored. Colonel Ellison stepped forward and placed the evidence envelope on the table. Body camera footage, civilian video, witness contact information, dispatch audio, and chain of custody documentation, he said. The room shifted. It was one thing to hear pain. It was another to realize pain had brought receipts. The panel chair leaned back slowly. And the officer involved? Placed on administrative leave pending review, Ellison said. His department has agreed to preserve all related records. Angela noticed the word agreed. It was polite. It was necessary. But it did not carry the force she wanted for the families in the room. Preservation is only the first step, she said. Trust is not repaired by storing evidence. It is repaired when people can travel 12 miles to work, school, worship, or home without rehearsing how to survive a conversation that should have been routine. The teenage boy's father bowed his head. The young mother wiped her eyes with the corner of a tissue. Across the table, another official closed his folder, no longer pretending to read ahead. Angela placed both hands lightly on the table. The challenge coin in her pocket pressed against her hip, a quiet reminder of leadership without cruelty. I came here prepared to speak about data, she said. I still will. Data matters. Training matters. Policy matters. But before any of that can matter, this panel must accept one truth. A badge, a rank, a uniform, or a title should not be required for a black citizen to be treated with basic dignity. No one moved. The words did not accuse one person alone. They reached beyond the roadside, beyond Caleb Harlan, beyond one department, into the places where silence had been mistaken for peace. Angela picked up the damp gray coat and held it over her arm. This is what I was wearing when I was doubted, she said. Not my uniform, not my stars, just this coat, my license, my registration, my name, and my voice. That should have been enough. In the back row, Walter Briggs had arrived quietly after giving his statement, still in his faded army jacket, rain drying along the seams. He stood when Angela finished, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the slow respect of a man who had finally heard the truth spoken in a room built to receive it. One by one, others rose with him. The sound was not applause. It was chairs moving, breath steadying, people standing because for once, their stories had not been made small. The standing silence lasted longer than applause ever could. Angela Whitmore looked across the hearing chamber and saw people who had arrived expecting another polite morning of careful words, now standing with their shoulders straighter, their faces open, their stories no longer folded away like documents nobody wanted to read. Walter Briggs stood near the back wall with his faded army jacket still damp at the collar. The young black mother held her folder against her chest as if it had become lighter. The teenage boy beside his father looked at Angela with an expression she recognized from soldiers after the first honest briefing. Not relief exactly, but the beginning of trust. The panel chair did not ask them to sit right away. He let the room breathe. Then he leaned toward the microphone, his voice changed by what he had heard. This panel will enter the roadside documentation into the official record. We will request a full review of enforcement practices along Route 1 and the surrounding access roads. We will also require immediate preservation of all related dispatch logs, body camera records, complaint files, and supervisory responses. The words were procedural, but this time they did not feel empty. They felt like doors being unlocked one at a time. Angela nodded once, not as a celebration, but as acknowledgement. Justice often arrived dressed in paperwork. What mattered was whether anyone had the courage to make that paperwork carry truth. When the hearing ended, no one rushed for the exits. Families approached the table quietly. Some gave names. Some gave dates. Some simply said thank you and moved on before emotion could overtake them. Angela received each one with the same attention she would have given a field report from a commander under pressure. Every voice mattered because every voice had survived being minimized. Colonel Ellison gathered the files while the base legal liaison spoke with the panel staff. Outside the chamber windows, morning had fully broken over Fort Belvoir. The wet pavement shone pale gold. Flags moved slowly in the clean air, not dramatic, not triumphant, just present. Angela stepped into a side hallway and paused beside a quiet window. She took the 3-star challenge coin from her pocket and placed it in her palm. The raised stars caught the light the same way they had under the gas station canopy, but they felt different now. Less like rank, more like responsibility. Walter Briggs approached carefully, stopping a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said, "Darius Miller is my neighbor's son. He is one of the young men who stopped driving that road. His father just texted me. He wants to know if it is safe to come forward." Angela closed her hand around the coin. "Tell him he does not have to be brave all at once," she said. "He only has to tell the truth when he is ready, and this time, someone will be listening." Walter nodded, his eyes bright. "I will tell him." Angela turned back toward the window. Far beyond the base, Route 1 carried cars through the late morning, ordinary drivers passing gas stations, neighborhoods, offices, and gates without knowing that a road can hold memory, and that memory can become evidence when the right people refuse to look away. She thought of the young sergeant in the hospital, of the military spouses in the back row, of the teenager who had finally lifted his eyes, of the gray coat still draped over the chair inside the hearing room. That coat mattered. The uniform mattered too. But what mattered most was the space between them. The truth that dignity should not depend on what someone wears before another person chooses to believe them. Angela walked back into the chamber, lifted the gray coat from the chair, and folded it over her arm. For a moment, the room was empty except for the faint hum of lights and the soft shuffle of papers being gathered into official files. She looked once at the table where the recordings had been placed, then once at the doorway where families had stood. No speech was needed now. The record had spoken. The witnesses had spoken. The morning had spoken in its own quiet way. Angela stepped into the hall, 3 stars on her shoulders, rain dried at the cuffs of her coat, and drove toward the road where the next unheard voice was waiting.